Appreciate you guys.
All right, let me see if I can't make myself the center of attention for a second. Yeah, it's such a joy. Let's see here, making sure I have all my ducks in a row. Yep. It is such a joy to share with you all, and it's been exciting, this entire thing. And Hasmukh, how can I go after Hasmukh? That was so beautiful. There's so many things that he shared that are so fundamental, and so even just the vocabulary he uses is exciting. And to see that being put into life, and him having the humility to just show certain things he has in process and an unfinished thing, because you know what? I hope that everything remains unfinished in the respect of that we're always continuing to design and we're always continuing to evolve. And so on that, I'm supposed to be speaking on basics of permaculture. And normally I call this class Foundations of Permaculture. And the reason I call this Foundations of Permaculture is just a word. It's just a word that we as people have come together and claimed and named, and it was designed with some intention and lots of observation. But what is the foundation that we build this concept of permaculture on? And I want us to first, before we dig, I normally have a tendency to just jump super deep and go very fast. And I also got live. I want to set some intentions. My first intention is for us to learn to stop and wait and observe nature. And then I'll share my second intention after we do that. So if we could just take a moment, and a lot of us are sitting in chairs, a lot of us are just sitting maybe in a house, is just in our mind and in our hearts and in our energy, just stop. And listen to the things around you. Imagine yourself putting your hands in dirt. Imagine yourself hugging a tree. Imagine yourself feeling the wind and the sunlight. Imagine yourself hugging a friend. Imagine ourselves looking in compassion on someone who's in distress. Imagine ourselves putting something in our mouth and tasting that essence. And let's just stop and be thankful for all these things that we have been gifted by the other things around us. And what joy it is to meet with the wind. What joy it is to meet with the taste in our hands, in our mouth. What a joy it is to feel the energy of a tree, to feel its shade. What a joy it is to feel the sunlight shining on us. And these are all things. Next thing I just want to say is imagine jumping into having the sunlight shining on you and you taking a hike through the forest, and then coming upon a crystal clear body of water where the water is flowing into a pond. It's crystal clear and clean, and you take your hands and you taste the water, and it's clean and refreshing. And then you jump into this body of water and feel the refreshing on you. These are all gifts that are from nature that we have the honor of sharing with the elements of nature. And so in that, I want us to be humble before nature, that we're also, just like the water gifts us, we're also to be in harmony with the water. Just like the human that we're hugging is in harmony with us, we're to be in harmony with them. And at the same rate, we're not to compromise ourselves. As Kayla sung, harmonize, not compromise. And we're going to get to that. So that's the first thing, is for us to stop and think and to be and present and to feel. And the next thing I want us to do is get excited. But you know what? Before we get excited, I want us to realize what humans have done over time and to violate the entities and the things and the spirits, the energy of the forest, the energy of the water, the energy of each other, and realize our place as humans violating other people and land and wind and sunlight, and not taking the opportunity to just soak those things in. So as we do that, I want us to realize our place, and it's a little bit of sadness, but I also want to excite us, and that's the main goal. So we want to realize our place in nature, realize what the people of the past and us of the past have done, and then get us excited. Because the reality is nature is dynamic. Nature is amazing, and we're an element of that. And we're to be dancing in this amazingness. And it's so fun. You know, I love people from other walks of life where I just meet them and I just feel their energy and wanting to be harmonious. And Kayla is one example of person. I just randomly was at a gathering that I taught human relations at. She showed up like 10 minutes after I taught, and I just felt the energy of her wanting to learn harmony. And she and Kayla are dancers. They enjoy teaching all kinds of dance, and they're studying dance. And just reality of it is that we as people need to learn to dance. Sometimes we're dancing with food in our mouth, you know? Sometimes we're dancing with the trees and the soil and the worms. And sometimes we're dancing with each other. Sometimes there are things that are difficult, as Hasmukh spoke of, where we're dancing with conflict. We learn to find a dance where we're not stepping on each other's feet, where we have harmony. And man, I'm expressing my overwhelming joy in seeing someone, also someone who saw American culture and learned some things. So as I build this foundation of excitement of nature, I want us to not take permaculture away for a second. We're just gonna almost like pulling this word off of us and looking at who are these people who observe permaculture or even other harmonious dances with nature cultures. What were they seeing, and what practices did they have that helped build that foundation? And when they did that, what did they see? You know, and I would like to go, you know, Bill Mollison, just to give honor, is a corner of permaculture. And Jeff Lawton and David Ahlgren have been amazing teachers of that. And they are just elements of nature that have taught us or shared with us what they saw. The really cool part about it is when you read these things, and then you also walk in nature, or you read anthropology and history, you start to see that we're all seeing the same thing from different angles. And the things that they saw and the observations and the methods are very similar, because we're all just more humans, or more just elements within nature dancing. So from that, I want to start by saying we did a little sadness in the fact that where we are, but nature heals and brings abundance. And the foundation of permaculture is when we stop and observe, and when we find that harmony, and we don't stop stopping, we continue to stop, we continue to observe, we find amazing harmony. And when that harmony happens, it's not just like, oh, it's taken us 10 years to destroy this watershed, and all the salmon are gone. You know, over the past 100 years, we've been destroying. Nature says that, and we see it so often, and it actually surprises science. So science, I love using science. Sometimes when I teach this, I have like a microscope behind, and I do a little jokey thing where I'm just like, act like I'm all technical. But we use science, but we have to realize that science is just this one little picture. This microscope is just one little picture of what we're seeing visibly. Science, or harmony with nature, surprises scientists over and over and over and over. And I'm actually going to throw up a poll here real quick on my other screen. I'm going to launch a poll, because after we get done with this, I was told we have a little bit extra time, or maybe I might go a little over, is if you would like to learn something beyond what I'm teaching in foundational permaculture, I would like to launch a poll to find out what you all want to learn. So if you guys want to just do that really quick, we can get that as homework out of the way. And so you guys can decide what you want to learn about. But so nature itself takes this watershed, and there's so many elements that stack, and that's things that were working together, and they stack functions. It's kind of like me trying to pull a log, you know, and I'm just dragging and pulling and flipping and such. But what if I got David Stein here to come help me? And then we had Julie come help too. And before long, we actually can move maybe 10 times further than I could pull myself in the same amount of time. Nature also doesn't just have David Stein and Julie. We're working with the wind and the sun and the microorganisms and elements we don't even know. Like scientists, I want to give thanks to Elaine Ingham and Jeff Lawton, who've taught me so much. I'm a student of both of them. And one of the things Elaine talks about is, hey, really, we don't need all these things. People talk about all these methods and we do this. I think this is a big problem in permaculture, is we're like, okay, I figured it out. I have now harnessed nature. I got the perfect permaculture solution. And you got to use this thing in this way with this temperature and this wood chip and this thing. And we got it. And you can grow all the food and we're going to save the world. I see that happening continuously. And what they're not factoring in is the dynamicness of nature and saying like, hey, nature, let's just stop and observe and see what's happening. So what Elaine Ingham talks about is really when those microorganisms find their harmony, and you know, in some ways we're just like seeing their effects. We don't always know everything that they're doing. They start to assimilate amazing things. And when then they work with the plants, now we're fixing nitrogen and phosphorus, and we're doing dynamic accumulation of all these amazing things. And what we're just looking at is not how they're doing or really all the full mandala of what they're doing. We're just seeing one little thing and we're like, okay, they did nitrogen, they did this thing, and they also do these other things. And so what we're doing is we're only seeing the little tip of the mandala of the harmony that happens in permaculture. So wow, we have like the survey came out, like there's not a major winner yet. I mean, there's close. Every urban permaculture is actually winning, but only by a little percentage. So we got some major ties here, which is interesting. We got to do, maybe we just should say them all, you know. So that's exciting to see people's broad interest in things. All right, so as we move forward, I want to talk about, I slightly referred to this earlier, but I like giving analogies, and I like giving a few so that way people can kind of grasp the concept. And keep in mind, if you're a seasoned permaculture person, maybe you'll learn an analogy to share with other seasoned or other new permaculture people. This class is majorly focused at learning the foundation of permaculture. So I wanted to give you a quick analogy. And this is, I call this permaculture of the wind. And so who here, we can just do a wave. Who here has flown a kite in the last year? Oh, wow, we had 2 kite flyers. Ooh, that's exciting, that's rare. That's exciting. Oh, some of you might have noticed this thing on the wall right here. That is my new kite. And I was doing a presentation the other day with a bunch of children. And so I got them all lined up and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna make you guys permaculture designers. And so I put hats on them. I say, every major permaculture designer has his hat, you know? So I put little Chinese hat. I said, the stranger the hat, the more they remember you. I gave them a shovel. I gave them some plants and such, and we got them excited about, you know, things. And I said, you know, it's really not about these elements. It's about stopping and thinking. And I had this kite. That huge kite was in this little bag, and I took the bag and I started pulling these things out. I was like, what does this have to do with permaculture? Oh, we got a kite on the screen. That's awesome. Oh, what is this kite? What is this thing I'm pulling out of here have to do with permaculture? And some of these are permy kids. And so they were saying, oh, it's a tent for you to go to a permaculture gathering. I was like, maybe. So I started putting this thing together, and before like turned into this mandala of a flower, they said, oh, that's the flower, you know, this flower in permaculture. I said, maybe. And then I said, it is a kite. And I said, and I demonstrated, and I said, what do we do? What do we need for a kite? And they said, wind. And so we stopped and we listened and we felt, and it's like, hey, do we feel wind right now? And they're like, yeah, there's enough wind. I said, okay, so what we're gonna do is I'm gonna fly this kite. And they said, I asked them, what do we do to fly a kite? And they said, you run. I was like, okay. So I was hoping they would say run. So I started running around this field, giving them a demonstration of kite flying. And this kite was staying up just enough. And I'm like, oh, we got it. It's up. And I keep running. I just got tired. I came back to them and I was like, you know what? This is an example of permaculture. I said, well, how about this? How about I stop and listen and feel? Let's just stop. Everyone close their eyes and we'll feel the wind. And so we felt the wind. And I said, do you think there's enough wind for this kite to fly? And they said, yes. And so I gently let the kite into the air. And the kite kind of flew a little bit and then landed. And I was like, you know what? The wind is sovereign in this space. The wind doesn't want to fly this kite. I need to be humble before the wind. And in that, maybe we just don't fly a kite today. And I think us as permaculture designers and us as humans, doesn't just mean about growing things, us as humans have been running around fields for a long time. We've been doing that in how we relate to each other. We've been doing that in community. And we've been doing that in growing food. And as I mentioned last night in the discussion, we've been doing that in growing flowers too. So little side note, I actually think more permaculture people need to grow flowers because that's the permaculture for your eyes, you know? And the joy of growing flowers is really fun. So yeah, we need to be a lot more ready to take that kite back apart and just put it aside for the day that it's meant to be. We need to have more honor. And really, more than anything else, does the wind mind that you're just running around the field? No, it doesn't really mind. The field might get stressed out, but really, us as humans are not honoring ourselves. And that leads me to the first important thing to share. And that would be what I call the first ethic of permaculture. And for the permaculture purists here, you can correct me. And I've redesigned these. And that would be care for self and honoring self and honoring your sovereignty. And realizing that this is something you're to do for yourself. And then secondly, this is something that you need to do in the same way you're honoring yourself in this, you need to honor the other selves around you. And I think we struggle even to do it with our own self, first off. And so until we do that, we don't think we're going to do a very good job at the other people. And then next is realizing that same honor, this is the second ethic, goes globally, all around us. Every element, every planet, every water, every tree is honored. And then the third one is the one you get excited. When those two things happen, then abundance starts to flow. And when all those things are working and dancing together, then amazing things happen. And it's not just like, oh, I put 2 units and I got 3 out. It's that when you have so much abundance that flows from that. And there's so many fun stories about how with just a small amount of effort, we get massive amounts of yield. And a lot of it comes down to perspective. When I say yield, it just be that outer flowing, this amazing abundance. And if we think about that in our relationships, is in the times that we honor the other and we honor ourselves, it may not look like it was meant to be. There's a song last night that Shaylee shared. I forgot how it goes, but she reclaimed a very toxic song I never realized was really toxic in its vocabulary, but she just talked about the honoring of the letting go. And it was a song that would be like holding someone close because you want them. And just like, oh, I'm going to honor the joy it was, the energy in which we shared together. And then I'm also going to honor you in your time to go. And in the same way, we take down the kite. We put it away. And we say, it's not, the wind does not want to be flown with today. And so if we're ready to do that, I think we're going to do a lot less destruction, and we're going to cause a lot more harmony. And we're going to build that abundance. And let me talk a little bit about how that happens in a forest. And then I'm going to use the forest analogy, and I'm going to come right back. We're going to slide back and forth between human permaculture and trees and plants. But the trees and plants have been doing a great job. In the places we haven't touched them, they've actually been doing a better job than when we touched them. So that's a quick observation. Maybe we should get a lesson from the trees that have been doing something better without us. But that doesn't come from the concept that they're always better off without us. Because if we're an element within nature, we can heal the destruction we had much quicker than the time it took to destroy it. And so that leads me to my quick life story. I'm going to do this, try to do this in 1 minute, starting now. I was born on the island of Guam in Southeast Asia on a goat farm. I was inspired by someone to help plant a food forest when I was a child. And I planted a bunch of trees in symbiotic relationship and was just helping people put some trees in the ground. And then my father got a grant from the government to clear cut the jungle and just basically do a cross-country grazing management, turn a jungle into an American prairie, which can't happen in the tropics on a slope. Basically, I became an orphan on the island of Guam, turned up in a prison for a year and a half as an orphan, sent a letter to Bill Clinton. Someone got my letter, and the US got me a trip to Oklahoma, where I started a software development company, was successful in building software for the Chinese government, sold a similar software on Guam, and went back to the farm, which I was born on. And I realized the destruction that was caused by good intentions of science and government influence with money that produced a destructive environment. Where I used to climb and get avocados and mangoes and papayas out of the fruit trees in the jungle that were naturally planted, there was limestone sticking out of the ground. And in the areas where I planted fruit trees on a neighboring land, where was once limestone, was deep topsoil I got my rental car stuck in. So I filled the back of my rental car with all the fruits and vegetables from the trees I planted as a child, got my rental car unstuck, and headed to the airport eventually, and went back to Oklahoma, where I bought 13 acres, started research, sold the 13 acres, bought 120 acres, was mentored by Jeff Lawton, developed methods of restoring deciduous forest, and then started a career in teaching and consulting and metamorphosis of land that's been destroyed by humans. So in that, I realized the human's destruction, but I didn't realize the level of change. So Oklahoma is I'm just gonna do an Oklahoma land demo here. So this is an average place. So Oklahoma, it was half prairie. Make sure everyone can see that. So half prairie, Oklahoma's half prairie. And that prairie had some slope on it, but the area that I was specifically dealing with was used to be a deciduous forest, majority oak with support species of a broad range of things. So we had a forest, a diverse forest with some conifers, and conifers are those evergreens or pines that you guys see, but really the overstory was oak. And what happened is oak, whether on a slope or not, actually produces some amazing topsoil. And Oklahoma had buffalo and deer and all this harmonious balance of nature. And there was indigenous people of the lands that were tenders of this and tended the forest and such. Well, there was something called the white man who came, and they sent all the Indians to Oklahoma and said, oh, we're gonna give the native people Oklahoma. And then they said, oh, wait, we're just gonna do something called the land run, and we're gonna just give away all the land. And as far as you can drive your fancy Tesla car across. No, it was I think they did horseback. So what they did was as far as you could go and do a claim, you could grab a piece of land and you call it yours. And so out came the saws, and they were like, we're gonna grow some cows, and we're gonna grow some wheat, and we're gonna grow some corn and all those other things. And so keep in mind, this is a sloped piece of land with a nice level of topsoil right here. And then anywhere it was sloped. And a lot of places it wasn't sloped. They cultivated the land, which means tilling it up. And then we had something called the Dust Bowl. And that's when the beautiful power of the wind became non-harmonious with the destruction or disturbance. We use the word disturbance, not always in a negative fashion in permaculture. Disturbances happen in nature when trees fall, but humans have caused a degenerative destruction. And so in that cultivation, we're going to cultivate. The wind came in and wiped out majority of the topsoil, blew it all into the valleys, and then rain came and washed down these slopes. And basically the only thing left on the piece of land on the sloped areas that had been cultivated, the only thing left was bare clay. And that bare clay will grow these little tiny junipers that were like little sores in the land. And nature, so now we have some history now, and we have some science, and so we have these little junipers. What will happen over 100 years or more, according to the university studies, is fires. There'll be a succession of junipers and fires that will come through over 100 years. And before long, some of the oak trees that will blow in from certain areas that haven't been destroyed, some of the oak trees will rise and will rebuild the canopy. So keep in mind, this is what nature is doing without us. This is a 100-year plan that nature finds its way without the humans after a human destruction. So nature is just gonna say, all right, we don't even need your help. But you know what? Nature is also calling us to say, hey, if you do something really small, you can actually heal the land. And people throughout ages have seen areas of destruction and fixed them. People have done more than that. People have said, this area that's undestroyed, the Mayans, there's all through history. There's so much data. You read the Bible, you read the Quran, you read any old historical document. There's so many words, just look for it. And it's exciting to see that when humans found harmony with nature, nature produced abundance. Humans didn't produce abundance, nature did. And we see that, I don't know how many people are, I can quote different historical texts, but like the Bible says, like a tree planted amidst the forest is fruit is sweet. And we also know through science that the natural assimilation of the sugar is a direct correlation to the nutrient density within the food. So we could say, like a tree planted amidst a forest, its fruit is nutritious and tasty. And it also says, like a tree planted by rivers of water, bringeth forth fruit in its season. Oh, and that'll also say that, hey, if you have water, then it's going to produce a continuous seasonal harmony that's going to produce food. And so people observed this a long time ago, and without any microscope or anything, and nature did it by itself. So I had this land, and it wasn't all degenerated, but a lot of it was. So after lots of observation and trial, I developed, I took Jeff Lutton's methods of swaling, and he's a pretty swale guy. And swale is a ditch on contour. Keep in mind, this is downhill, okay? And right here is what we call a swale. We just dig a ditch. And this ditch has a little mound. And this little mound, we plant little trees in. The water flows down here, fills in right here, and creates a lens of water over time. And this is a theory, and there's a lot of methods to get to this point. And I perfected some of the methods specifically for my observations. So like, that's one thing we can learn. As a new permaculture person, don't just copy and paste a cookie cutter. We have to continuously stop and observe. I teach earthworks. It's kind of like what I go to the Pacific Northwest for a whole lot, is to teach large-scale earthworks. And I restore hundreds and thousands of acres across the world utilizing methods such as this after observation. Sometimes they'll show up and say, no, we don't swale this place. It's going to be swale without a swale. But in general, we got a lens of water, and that lens of water soaks into this mound. And this mound is like loose soil, and it starts to allow the tree to put its roots down. So now this tree rises and produces a canopy. And we use nitrogen fixating trees, and ones that would grow naturally by themselves in nature to fill the space. And we also don't just plant big trees. We plant a whole succession of different levels of trees. Why? Why do we do that? We do that specifically because we see that as a harmonious edge within nature. We can walk through any space that's been untouched by humans, and we could see maybe a buffalo run through here. Okay, cause a disturbance. A year later, we observe this edge where nature does these things. So if nature's already doing it, all we got to do is like, hey, nature, you're already doing this job. Well, let's just hang out with you, and we do this. So what we're going to do is we're going to hang out with nature, plant some of these understory nitrogen fixators. And what I also find is a lot of times planting these nitrogen fixators heavy, we rise and produce a nice canopy, and then we're going to produce this little apple tree. Because you know what? I've always wanted this cool apple tree, this cool peach or jujube, or even better, we could go with pawpaws and some of the more exotic nutrient-dense food that you can't find in a grocery store. Those are the best foods. And I get off on caveats here, but you know how to know whether something is nutrient dense? One of the signs is you can't get it to the store. Can't get it to the store because mold's eating it, because mold's eating all those good things, and mold and bacteria and such. And so some of the best tasting food in the world happens seconds after you pull it off the tree. And that's exciting. That's just like, oh man, like man, mangoes. I'm so glad I went right after Hasmukh today, because, you know, he's talking about mangoes and things like that. I'm like, you know, like mangoes people don't really realize, I say because people don't really realize the diversity of mangoes. There's a lot of mangoes that aren't going to make it to Oregon and Washington. They just can't. You'd have to 4-hour mail them. Some of the best mangoes won't transport, and they're rare. And you know, I have a great student of mine that she's just obsessed with mangoes, you know, and she's the mango professional, you know, and she's going to teach permaculture of mangoes because she has observed mangoes and the history of mangoes and knows how to dance with a mango. So that's what we'll call the class, Dancing with Mangoes, permaculture style. All right, so we got the understory. I get off on tangents here. We got understory. So we have all these different levels. And before long, we have this nice little edge created here. It's a nice bushy edge, and it makes a nice little family for this tree to rise. And the tree rises, this maybe sometimes hard to find fruit tree, rises with so many elements that we can't even add them all up. But I'm just going to throw some in here. Let's just say the sunlight's coming from this angle right here. So we got the sunlight coming in. The sunlight's shining in on your system here, but there's so much shade here that the bottom level doesn't get evaporation. What happens at night also is we have condensation that happens. So now we stop evaporation, cause condensation. Also, we got wind. We got wind coming here. Put a W here. Wind coming through here. We're not evaporating due to wind also. When all these things come together, we're creating the best, nice, moist little environment. We also have drainage here. This tree its feet aren't deep in the water. It's actually on this nice little mound, and it's sending its roots down into moistened soil. So these are, again, all just observations of nature, and we have observed when you put these elements together on highly depleted clay soil, bam, you produce, you send the system back into a restorative state. this also does so many other things. I'm just talking about one little space. We can make this swale 10 miles long. We can make it 3 inches long or 3 foot long or however length. It still does. Nature replicates itself as long as we're being intentional in that design. So the swale is doing these things. We can restore a huge amount of space. This isn't just growing these fruits or this pawpaw that I've always wanted to eat. This is also repairing so many other destructive things. I just told you, hey, we took off the entire forest in Oklahoma, and we went ahead and we went and we had runoff. That runoff goes into the rivers. That topsoil is now clogging the streams and rivers and destroying the habitat downstream. All these elements are affecting other land downstream. What this lens of water does, it actually stops flooding long-term and causes a regulated springs within the system. We're storing water higher up. And in most systems, we'll create a whole succession of swales. And it could be 1,000 acres, and we're doing 10 swales across 1,000 acres. It could be a space as small as an acre, and we're doing 10 swales in it because we mean to. And those swales are specifically designed based on our observation and re-observation. So this would be an example of me utilizing already existing, already observed systems and producing change. All right. So the question, as I said to you, that we should see an exponential growth, or, you know, putting in these units of repair, and nature comes along with us and it produces abundance. We see this in multiple levels. One of the areas is time. I told you that the science says that it would take 100 years to bring the system back into a restorative state of symbiosis. What I was able to do is send the system back into an exponential growth curve of abundance recorded by nutrient density and nutrient density of the fruit and vegetables and such, topsoil production, building, so building the topsoil, and moisture retention, and one of the biggest elements is microbial life production. Whenever you can create, look, I mean, I know this is a crazy drawing, but you have all these elements coming together, this diversity, and now you have, when the leaves blow, you have a nice little trap in the blackberries for that soil to start building. And before long, as we set a system of these systems, we rebuild that topsoil. And when that microbial life starts, then really we can grow anything. We can also resist anything. We can resist climate change. You know, we say, you know, we need a plan for the climate's changing. I don't really care. I do care who destroyed it, but I'm also more interested in who's going to repair it and who's going to stop the destruction. All right. It doesn't, honestly, I argue with, I mean, I was in Oklahoma, by the way, so I had to like use biblical terms to explain what we're doing. And that was really good. You speak the language, and I learned so much from the Bible on how that there is continual patterns of nature. You know, that should be a fun, controversial class. Permaculture of the Bible. We'll do that at 2021, and I'll do that. I want to do that. That'll be fun. I hope we get plenty of hecklers and people with comments using nonviolent communication, of course. I love being challenged. That brings the subject that I normally start out my classes with is I try to teach from a non-hierarchical way. I've done these things and faced a bunch of things, but it doesn't make me any higher than you. I am ready for criticism because you know what? I learn from it. It's a feedback loop. So those are welcome publicly and privately. Some people are like, oh, talk to me in private. No, put it in the chat. Say, you know what? I think you're totally wrong, David. I'm like, yes. And we'll just let someone else who's taken my course explain. David he gets on a tangent and he said it wrong. Okay. All right, here we are. We got topsoil being built. And now that we have topsoil being built, we start to see an exponential growth curve of all those elements I just said. And an exponential growth curve just means, and I'm just going to give a demonstration here. It's kind of the slope of like here. It's kind of like when you're putting investments in the stock market or like in a savings account. Before long, you get a lot more yield. I'm using a capitalistic explanation, but what I would inspire you to do is stop and observe the exponential growth curves that you see, this abundant life that comes when systems are majorly destroyed. So don't go looking for your nice little fertile soil. Find the most depleted space that you can work with, and then start listening and mimicking nature's patterns of harmony and dance with that space. And when you see like, oh wait, we got, you know, the trees are growing this much, this much, this much, and before long they're like growing like this much, and you're like, whoa, what happened here? Symbiosis most likely happened with the microorganisms and the root structure on those plants, along with a plethora of other things. It could be also they have moisture now. They're able to, enough water compiled in the swale to produce enough moisture for these areas to thrive. Now keep in mind, now that we've created a symbiotic system, this system is super robust. It's like, hey, climate change, I'm ready for you. Hey, drought, I'm ready. Over, you know, like a major gully washer of rain, call it a gully washer because it washes out those gullies. We're ready for you. And so in some ways, I don't know, as you as a person, I'm gonna jump back into the social realm here. Have you ever seen some point in your life where just everything, just like all these things are hurting and hard, and you just feel like you're in a desert? And then one person comes alongside and says, hey, I'm here. I might just listen to you. I might just hand you $20 that you needed to do something you need to get done. And before long, that harmony comes together in your own life. And you're like, oh, wow, like I thought I was in the depths of despair. You were. But the reality is we underestimate the power of harmony. And that's the foundation of permaculture, is harmony, observing through harmony and mimicking on the ground. And Hasmukh was saying biomimicry, just mimicking the biodiversity in the systems and how they relate. So there's a few words I want to talk about. And I use all these words kind of, they overlap. And I love words because, and also there's some words that I just kind of like, let's just take that off of my vocabulary. This one caused someone pain. What's a better word we can come up with that would be more harmonious, you know? So there's a few words I use. One word I don't use a whole lot is permaculture, because a lot of people think of permaculture as the guy with the hat on that shows up on your land and tells you everything you need to do. And it's also those people in the city, speaking of urban permaculture, which was a popular thing on the survey here. Urban permaculture says that, oh, you're gonna take a pile of wood chips and put them under cardboard in your front yard and have all your neighbors mad at you, and it's gonna look like a jungle of a mess, and you're just gonna be crazy. And yeah, so I'm doing a generalization here, but permaculture can look like different things. Harmony, we'll just put the permaculture aside. Harmony with nature can look like many things. So when you use the word permaculture, sometimes you're like made people off. It's also a fad. So you're like, oh, I'm here, you know? So like sometimes I go to cities where there's really not much of a permaculture movement, but yeah, there's been a lot of people behind their computers, like obsessed with permaculture, and they're just like permaculture groupies. And so they all show up and like, oh, I want to learn about permaculture. And it's like, it's a fad. So I would say we need to move past some of those. And that's one reason sometimes I'll just come in and speak to people who are really struggling, find spaces that are struggling and fix those spaces. And when we learn how to repair spaces and people and systems that are in degenerative space, people come not because the word permaculture, they don't come running with their hats and shovels. They come because they see change. And they say, what is this? And I don't just throw permaculture into the mix. I just say, you know what? It's harmony with nature. And I learned that through a method called permaculture, or a science, a design science called permaculture. And people that gather together and hang out and learn together. And there's been amazing people who've called utilizing this system permaculture, but it's also something that goes way beyond Bill Mollison. You know, I would encourage people to read Masafioku's book, The One Straw Revolution. You know, There's so much more. And I love some of the speakers that have already spoken. One guy was kind of like hesitant in this permaculture group, hesitant to say, well, I mean, I'm not really that much of a Bill Mollison permaculture method, fan. And he's like, well, I'm not against it, but I'm not for it. I was like, I totally get you. I totally get you. I'm not going to do it today, but it's a funny thing. I'm going to do this as a stand-up comedy one time at a permaculture convert. Maybe I'll do it tonight. I'll try to do this tonight. You guys come tonight? I'm going to reenact the Bill Mollison permaculture ethics, but in a toxic way. Because literally, we could take those there and apply them like totally in a toxic way, and it's hilarious. So we can't just follow these rules, but we can say this human looked at nature and found these things important, and we can learn from those. Does everyone follow this picture of not jumping on a religion of permaculture, but more of a relationship with nature and harmony? Okay, so I got to get back on the abundance thing. So on this abundance, the third ethic that comes is this system where we're going to create a lot more. So by my calculations, the system that I developed, or basically me observing and me interacting with nature taught me to do some things here. And when I did these things, I was able to put the system in an exponential growth curve of 8 years. And that would mean in 8 years from the time I touched untouched land after the Dust Bowl, basically it was untouched since the Dust Bowl, very little touching, I was able to send it into a regenerative state in 8 years. Then I learned so much from that first research. And I was like, I don't know, this is not done. Like I was just shocked. Sometimes I'm under my microscope and I'm looking at numbers, or I pull up my refractometer and look up a number, or I measure the topsoil, or just put my hands in it and I see it. And I see this massive growth. And it just like, there were so many moments where I just were shocked. And I was like, wow, this is like what people have talked about for thousands of years. This is what we read about. This is what Bill Mollison was talking about. This is what David Ahlgren and Jeff Lawton and Maso Fioku were talking about. Is there so much that comes from it? So when I saw that, I was like, okay. So I realized what I did. I mean, I just did very little, honestly. I realized what little I did. I was like, if I could do the same amount of energy, but a little different, I actually think it'd make this better. So I was able to tweak some of the systems, and I got to about 6.5 years is my calculations of an exponential growth curve. And that's just me just calculating numbers and throwing it out there. Like 6 is way better, or even 8 is way better than 100 years. So humans, when stopping and creating harmony, can just do an amazing thing with dirt. I would say this is the same with government. And I have a little bit of a list here that I go through. This is the same thing in government. This is the same thing in what we call business, working together, energy exchanges between people. When we stack functions, when we're conscious, when we're willing to say no, it's not the time to fly this kite. I'm sure some of you have ever been proposed some job or business, and you're like, oh, wait a second here. I'm gonna be running around this field like a crazy person. And at the end of the day, it's not gonna be harmonious with me. So business relationships, government, what are we facing these days in our world? Oh man, do we have hope for abundance in our government? I think that comes from those first two ethics, and that comes fundamentally from the ground. And it happens a lot of times through a few other things that are, some of them may push some buttons and be triggering to some people because they're reality. And that'd be parenting relationships or caring for the younger people within our world. And I also think one of the elements of that, just to give you a sneak preview of permaculture parenting, is not being possessive. I work to not use the vocabulary of my children. They're the children that I tend to. And just changing words, but I think out from those words is my intention to not own someone and to not be owned by someone, but to say, I adore you, I care for you, I'm here for you. And how can I dance in harmony with you to prepare you to dance in harmony with all the other elements around the world? Friendships. I don't know, friendships can be really difficult. Have you ever been in something that was just like a degenerative dance? Finding those and be willing to say, you know what? This tree is better suited on the other side of the forest, you know? And I honor you as a tree. I honor you from afar. Or maybe I'm a bird, I'll be on the other side. The next thing would be education, what we call education, bringing knowledge and moving it around, needs to be non-hierarchical. Home sharing relationships. I notice I didn't say my home, but just the sharing of a space, the same roof with people. That, I think, needs these elements of harmony. Land ownership and ownership in general, land stewardship. How can we do that? Caring for our health and the health of the others that we're to honor. Death. How am I going to grow old? And when I do, how can I be a good old person? Has anyone here ever met a grouchily old person and said, you know what, I don't want to be the grouchily old person? The reality is that person is a person. And you know what, maybe they were not given that opportunity, but how can we find and reharmonize our relationship between ages? That is fractured in our culture. Partnership relationships, so whatever we want to call it, partnering with another human. What does that look like in honoring our sovereignty? Intimate relationships. How do we navigate this thing that's become is a very beautiful part of our nature? How can we reharmonize and change the patterns and repattern that to be like this food forest here? Parenting was just already covered. Global patterns and all how they work together. What we would call crime. What happens when someone comes to you and is degenerative and says, I don't respect nonviolent communication? How do we navigate these things? And I'm posing a lot of these as questions, but I'm proposing that we apply the elements of harmony in permaculture to get to the point where we get that harmony and we get that abundance, because I think that that is fundamental to fixing the land. And like we watched like the salmon. I was like, I mean, just who watched that video last night? That was really awesome. I'm sure lots of you did. I see a bunch of hands raising. But like, do you realize here we had these people who stopped and listened to the other humans, held space for them, and took their advantage and helped the disadvantaged. And by just giving a little bit of their resources, just a little bit of that. And so that comes to something I shared with the population of people the other night. I'm just going to share it really quickly. And that is the concept of sacrifice within the systems and succession and patterns and how we mimic those in permaculture. And I would argue in our world today, we have an imbalance and we also have an infestation. And some of that needs to be repatterned. And sometimes we see this in nature. We see like, I might plant a bunch of black locusts and they're doing this element of restoring the system. And I'm not proposing that the white man is restoring the system right now by any chance, but I am suggesting that the white man in our culture has produced a lot of branches. I'm entering this analogy really quick with all humility, I hope. And if I need some more, please hand it out. And this is my theory, and I'm willing to take criticism and additions to my my analogy here. And I also know that this is a heated topic, but I'm proposing this as my contribution the best I can, because I've also been challenged by sisters and brothers who have been disadvantaged that I've been too silent. I've been stopping and listening too long. And sometimes we need to stop and act as humans. Stop and do. Sometimes things do need small, slow solutions, and nature does do those things. We don't need to be afraid of that. But that's one downside to small, slow solutions, is the fact that sometimes things are so degenerative that we need a massive change. So I'm gonna say this red tree represents the massive foundation of years and years and years of dominance of certain people within our culture. This analogy could be used in the nature too and so many other elements, but I'm going to use this nature analogy to suggest something that I'm going to be working hard. This is where my heart is when it comes to the injustices of our culture today. In this, that is, I'm like this tree. There was moments in my life where I experienced disadvantage on a large scale. But when I got to the United States, I was handed a card I'd never seen before. And that was a card of a tall white male. And it was like a credit card. I got jobs. The only time I can imagine myself being disadvantaged was by age. When I was in business at 16 years old and people mocked at me for trying to get contracts. So the reality is there was a lot of trees that were planted at the same time as me, but because of some other elements within nature or within the toxic environment, I would say, the sunlight is represented over here. And I would put an arrow, sunlight coming in. This tree didn't fall on really a lot of fertile soil because our culture itself is really degenerative in this. But it's grown some little spindly branches and deer have come up and eaten them at times. My branches are really tall. So yeah, I can resist this deer. They can take a branch, no problem. I'm just gonna put another branch over here and it's gonna even shade that tree even more. But I would propose that as this large tree, to simplify my discussion, I need to do what I call coppicing, which in my swales, I was able to coppice the black locust that took nutrients and provided resources and shade, but they also would prevent the smaller trees from growing. I propose that the advantage within our culture find a dance, and that dance comes much more awesomely from a coppicing, and that's just a chopping of some of the branches. And this coppicing will, so keep in mind, I got some major roots here. These roots are still there. I'm not taking out my roots, just taking out the top. It will give space for these two trees to rise in harmony. Oh, wait a second here. What do we do with this here? What do we do with that coppice stuff? We placed it here to stop, soak, and store water and provide the environment for the disadvantaged trees to rise. Now, this isn't just like taking from one and giving to the other. That's not what nature does. I'm going to grow out a bunch of other spindly branches, and also I'm going to continue to grow too. This doesn't stop my growth. I now have more regulated water systems. I now have friends. I now have colleagues and people who we can share the sunlight together. We can share the wind together. And you know what? We will all be, this is a reality in nature. We'll all be more fruitful. I will be more fruitful. I took a disturbance, and in that disturbance, so much more came out. And in my disturbance gave opportunity for the rise together as a culture. And this system as a whole will, in its diversity, because in its diversity we'll have a much more robust dynamic microorganism growth. It will have a much more dynamic water system and water storage system. it will also, the fruit that comes out of these trees and the larger branches that are, it's no longer spindly because now we're growing together. No longer spindly, the fruit that comes out of here will be more abundant, first off, compared to where they came from, but will also be more nutrient dense because that comes from the assimilation within the soil. So I could go on for a long period of time on this, but that would be my proposal. And this is something I've been doing. And so the question is, what does that look like? Oh, David, you just talked about this being, I'm asking the questions for you, but you guys are welcome to ask questions a little bit later. But what does that look like? For me, the first thing that looks like is me coppicing my time. The reality is, and I'll go back to me realizing and stopping and soaking. The reality is I actually did a large earthworks course that turned out going under because the humans didn't find harmony. And I should have been more observant of that. So I made it a goal to spend half of my education, half of my time, and half of my resources when it comes to my career in social permaculture, basically. Social harmony and researching thus. But then as I've been challenged as of late, is to be willing to take resources and compost them into something that breeds change. Another element within nature is fungus. And so that's something I've observed is the fact that we need more fungus in the Black Lives Movement. This is just David's observation, and that's something I'm hoping to provide, is methods of communication. Fungus moves resources and communication between things. And I would say nonviolent communication within our culture, especially the culture that I'm COVIDing in, needs nonviolent communication education desperately. And so I'm providing that as an avenue. And I would say that we need to provide not only, we need to look at where there is a need and stop and observe some of these scenarios and share. Another thing is listening. Stopping and listening to all the other elements. And so that comes back down to what I said earlier as far as my time, is being willing to coppice my time to listen. Because again, that's where we all started here, is stopping and listening to nature. But not only nature, but stop and listen to its cries. Stop and listen to its smiles, to the energy of the scenario. If we were to do that and how we related to one another and stopping, then I think there would be a lot more harmony. And I'm not speaking this from a person who's a succeeder in this. I'm speaking to as a person who's realized my need to stop and listen in all of my relating. And I'm thankful for many sisters and brothers who are disadvantaged in our culture that have spoken to me and shared their truth with me and helped me to see and helped me to listen better. So in that, that's a thing within itself. And so I'm gonna actually, I'm gonna see what time it is. I have this really cool app. It's 10:23 Ural's time. And I just wanna make sure we are good on time. I have a tendency to enjoy sharing. Shaylee, can you tell me how much time I have? I'm kind of like, or someone else, maybe Julie can put in the chat there, their perspective of my time.
Let's see, 10:30, you got 5 minutes.
Oh, 5 minutes. And I was told that the next presentation was a little bit more relaxed because it's only 25 minutes and given a larger spot. So we might have some good amount of time for sharing. I do want to go down a few things just to make sure that I'm covering some things that maybe people are maybe missing. And also if you like, oh, David, you just taught foundation of permaculture, like you missed this whole thing I came to the convergence for. That's what I want to hear, because you know what? I would love to hear what you would like to hear. So the first questions I'm going to ask, and I'm not asking them yet, the first questions I want to ask is, if there is anything that you didn't hear that you feel is fundamental to the foundation of permaculture that you want to hear, if you could put that in the chat in like a sentence, and then if I could have Julie share those. And I'm doing this so that way we can get through a lot of questions, because I think people might have some more in-depth questions. But I want to ask, if there is an element within permaculture, not a method, but a mindset, like a foundational thing that you feel like I haven't covered, I'd love for that to be thrown in the chat. And if Julie or anybody would like to jump on telling me what those are, I'm gonna go over a few things. So the principles of permaculture, just so you can understand Bill Mollison's perspective, and these are what Bill Mollison saw from his perspective. And honestly, this is a wonderful list, because he stopped and observed for a long time and came up with some good words to use. Observe and interact, we talked about. Catch and store energy. Yeah, seems very possessive in its words, but yes, utilizing the energy and like water uphill type of concept. Obtain a yield. I would say, I would rephrase that in the fact of, I need to make the David version of this list. A yield being showing a very harmonious dance in what you've done, and enjoying that dance and finding that. Apply self-regulation and accepting feedback. Use and value renewable resources and services. Producing no waste. Design from patterns, and we just talked about that. We can't design from patterns until we stop and interact. Integrate rather than segregate. Very important. There was a person that asked me the other day, this came out in the song that was sung earlier, was I had a person in a social permaculture class ask me, David, what about compromise? I was like, ooh, that just triggers me. I was like, that's a word that's like, she's like, wow, what do you do with compromise? Like, what if someone says, let's compromise? And Hasmukh even jumped on it, which I thought was awesome. Like, no, they don't. They find consent. But I was like, okay, so how do you process that? And I would say, do we compromise anything? Do we compromise our ethics and our morals and our future and our dreams or anything? No, we don't. So if a person's asking you to compromise, maybe you ask them, what do you mean by that? So I have like a whole book worth of phrases like this that I'm hopefully to combine in a book called Permaculture of Human Relations, hopefully coming out in the next year. And so this element, I said, hey, this is the end of the class. I was like, I would call this what I call a crowbar. So it means that someone's like coming into your life and crowbarring you. The government does this all the time. Hey, I'm gonna give you a grant. Crowbar. You know, it's power over another. It's violation of sovereignty. I was like, let me process this and I'm gonna come up with an exercise. So let me teach you guys an exercise. Anytime you feel like, oh, I feel pressured to compromise, or should I compromise? Anytime you hear that word, it's kind of like saying, should, you should do this. So make that a trigger in your mind. The word compromise, you ask yourself one simple question. This person is using the word compromise, or maybe I'm using it on myself. Could I delete that word and use the word harmonize in the same sentence? If not, run, like just leave, say no. And if no is not accepted, run. If we don't, life is too amazing to be hanging out with people asking you to compromise anything. But if someone's saying compromise and they really mean harmonize, it can make a really good discussion. Be like, hey, could we just change that sentence and be like, how can we turn this idea into from a compromise into a harmonize? And when we do that, then we're like, harmony, just like two people come together. And you know what? When two people sing in harmony, the music that comes from it is so much better, so much more beautiful. It's this beautiful thing rather than the conflict. So harmonize, not compromise. And that was beautiful by Kayla in the song today. So yeah, from there, was there any questions that came up of things that I didn't cover? Oh, I didn't finish my list real quick. Use and value the edges and the marginal. So important. And you can take any of these and observe them before you even touch it. Like it says use. I don't like the word use as much. It says use and value diversity. Like, why don't we do this? Why don't we observe diversity and observe the abundance that comes when we honor diversity? And how about cherish diversity? And then edges and marginal. I would say let's dance with the edges and the marginal and decide whether it'd be harmonious for us to work with them in these edges. Creatively use and respond to change. Also look at and change. We have patterns. That's one of my most favorite parts of permaculture is we observe all those patterns. We have seasons. It's like me and Julie have gone through seasons. Julie Wolf is a volunteer on the board. We've gone through seasons. I met her. That was the first season. Hello, Julie. You know, we become friends. And then from there, I was excited to get to know her and she was excited to get to know me. But then I was in a very busy state of teaching at the Permaculture Convergence and being involved in it. And I wasn't able to take the time to harmonize as depthly as I wanted, but we harmonized for moments. Before long, we started working together, and now we work together a whole lot on the board, a bunch, and we find harmony. And so we don't put these things in boxes like this is the cookie cutter or recipe for harmony, but I observed and interacted with her. And so let's honor changes. You know, there could be a day and a time coming, Julie, that I would like to be on the other side of a forest from you. And in my analogy earlier, it means I want to be really far apart from you. But maybe instead of being on opposite sides of the nation, I might be able to, when I'm 70 years old, walk through the forest and bring you a cup of tea, you know? And that will also cover us growing old. And I hope that from this discussion, we can lay patterns of all of us finding more harmony, first with ourselves, next with each other. And I hope to grow old with you all. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here, is to honor myself and my desire for community and to share what first my mother gave me, and showing how she built community and was harmonious with land and nature. And then also so many other amazing humans who have shared life with me and shared their life with me. And also nature itself who spoke to me. Was there any questions? Was there any questions of anything that wasn't covered?
Yeah, there's good stuff. And I also wanted to say, I'm still observing our relationship. Okay.
Good. Keep an eye on me.
And myself. Okay, so it's easiest for me to start at the bottom. So I'm just going to go with Deepika. Are swales a necessary component for permaculture? Also, can raised planting beds be incorporated into permaculture design?
You know what? I'm going to answer that sometime this weekend, but when it's appropriate, yeah, all the time. I actually developed a system of raised garden beds, and I used it to actually help fund my permaculture research. They're permanent raised garden beds utilizing concrete done the Egyptian style. And I was able to utilize those as an energy exchange that funded me paying for the mortgage on my farm, along with some other methods. So raised garden beds are great. I would just say they are an intensive and tweaked version. And I would say utilizing them for only your zone 2, which we kind of zone in permaculture and we kind of lay things out. And, so yeah, just be observing on where you're placing them and such is super important. Swales they're not swale for every spout, you know? They're just a method, and they're mimicking what happens when a tree falls on contour and soil piles up beside it. So they're just mimicking one of the elements within nature. But what happens when a tree falls not on contour? It might focus the water rather than spread, soak, and store the water. So sometimes we use other methods, and sometimes we don't even do a swale. We put something a little bit off contour, and we move some water away from landscapes. So consciousness is the solution, and swales and raised beds are just one of those elements.
Egyptian style?
Yes, Egyptian style. So for example, Egyptians use fiber within the concrete. I also believe using fly ash within concrete is toxic, and we don't need to be utilizing the toxic proceeds from coal fire plants as a flow agent within concrete in every street in the world. Or a lot of them, that's happening. So I make sure that we're not putting fly ash in our growing systems. So it takes a while, a little bit of capitalism, I would say, a little bit of working and creativity to try to get people to get me concrete with fiber in it that I can trust. But I found it, and I also found a method. I developed this over about 5 years, and today, once COVID started, I started this in St. Petersburg, Florida. I'm offering hexagon-shaped garden beds that are precast and put in place. And so, yeah, and I won't even go into it, but there's a lot of opportunities there.
And the words, I'm not sure there's a question in this, but the words are catching my attention. And I want to welcome Christy Nevitt for joining us from Willapa Bay. She says, apocalyptic humor is often toxic, but causes us to look a little longer while we laugh nervously. I look forward to your stand-up act tonight, David.
Awesome. That's fun. I totally agree. Someone said the other day, they're like, oh, are you ready for fall? And someone's like, yeah, I'm really taking the fall really seriously. They were talking about, someone thought it was the fall of society, you know? It's like, no, on autumn. Are you ready for autumn? You know, some people are kind of like a little stressed out, so.
Okay, then we have from Adrian, curious about the timing of observing because of possibility of certain species taking over very soon in Pacific Northwest and missing opportunity to help with soil regeneration. By help, I mean harmonize.
Yeah, that's so true. There are some things that are time sensitive, but we do that through observation, and we have so much data. So we might say, oh, I'm stopping in enough time to observe that this is time sensitive, and I'm willing to take feedback if I might be wrong. Those are elements of saying, okay, let's stop. Okay, yeah, we need to act quickly. You know, we're about to breach this, you know, piece of land with the water flow. You know, there's so many emergency things, or hey, there's a lot of problems that are time sensitive. So yes, there's always an exception to the rule. And in permaculture, it says our problem is our solution. So we need to think about that too. Go ahead.
Those functions of mushrooms, Sylvan says, are why I have dubbed my chosen family my, quote, mycelial family.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Mycelial family, yes, so true.
Which I think there might be newer things. Let's see. How did you measure microbial life and nutrient density?
Microbial life is done Elaine Ingham style. So Elaine Ingham is multiple PhD, and we're able to look at, under a microscope, the microbial life. And we do it using a scientific method. There's some great YouTube videos that kind of give you a crash course. She also came and spoke at the Convergence. She also offers a full in-depth course that actually prepares you to offer that as a service. And so that's another way of making a little bit of an energy exchange within permaculture quickly on, is saying, oh, hey, I'm going to get Elaine Ingham's training, and then I can also go out and offer the service to other farms. You know, I have a $3,000 microscope that's paid for itself multiple times because of the fact that I'm utilizing that for an energy exchange for people. That's another thing I offer to teach, and I can actually teach that sometimes remotely. It's more fun in person, is microbial life. And hopefully I'll do that for Halloween, as I do a scary microbial life live under a microscope. And so people fall over in their chairs because they see a nematode squirm past. It's really fun when people bring their own soil and I make them scream. That's fun. So yeah, so microscopes. And then the other thing is, I have it right here, probably. A good permaculture designer has a refractometer at his fingertips. refractometer is a nice starting point also, and finding the Brix reading, which is a direct correlation to its sugars, which is a direct correlation to its nutrient density in a natural system. So that's a nutshell.
Do you have yours? Joshua was very excited to have, I believe that's what you just got, right, Joshua? A refractometer? You just got one at Sahale.
Yeah, everyone needs one. I have like, I always have a few refractometers sitting around here. So yeah, everyone needs one. If not, another thing is you can buy a real expensive one and you can buy a really cheap one. I have both. I have like a scientifically optimized one. And so I can actually adjust your refractometer if I'm in town. So I always tell people, bring your refractometers, we'll just tweak them to make sure that they are honed in really well to make sure you're getting a good reading. But even if you just pick up one off of Amazon for 20 bucks, you're still getting some sort of a reading, and you're going to be able to look at that reading and get some data.
Right. So am I using the right term? Joshua didn't come off mic or video. I think it's a refractometer. It's a long device that you look through and measure the sugar. Is that what you mean, David?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The sugar of like grapes or apples to see when they're ripe and collect the data over time. That's what I'm getting so far.
Yeah, and keep in mind, there's a whole science behind this. I could teach an hour class on it. So I think some people, oh man, you wouldn't believe how many permaculture designers, where'd my hat go? Or, just do they show up, and they walk around and they do the refractometer thing. And the reality is it is complicated, I encourage, if we would like the movement to make massive changes, we're going to need to get a better foundation. And, Bill Mollison and Jeff Lawton asked that question. Bill Mollison has passed, and he asked that question. He said, why? Jeff Lawton asked the same question, is what is it? Why have we not changed the world already? And so I ask you all that question, is why have we not? If we have these ethics already in place and they're just so perfectly placed, what are we missing? And I would argue, I don't know if it's exactly what we're missing, but David's perspective is, I see, at least in myself, a missing of finding harmony within myself, and then the sovereignty of each person being honored, and the sovereignty of it all. And if we can make that a cultural change, I think it would change everything else. And it would cause the metamorphosis within our culture to like rise quickly and have that exponential rise of a forest that we see in nature. And I hope I see that in my lifetime. I believe in humans just in the same way I believe in trees.
That's great.
Any other questions?
We've gotten a lot of compliments. We didn't cover my question, but that's okay. I know what it is. And I've got my little pawpaws on a plate. So
someone has a pawpaw on a plate? Who has a pawpaw on a plate?
I do.
Oh, I would give you a hug right now. Okay, so I got to kind of jump on pawpaws for a second. Pawpaws are an amazing fruit, and they love a natural environment. They love to find a place, and they sit and they find their roots. And then they produce a tree over time. They like the shade. You can't throw them in an orchard and have them just produce the nutrient density that you're going to find in the forest. And how do I know this? I know this because of the fact that university studies say that the pawpaws that are grown in the forest are producing the correct compound that's curing cancer, and the ones grown in the orchard aren't. And so the bark of a pawpaw tree is going to be curing so many cancers in the future. We just don't have enough in this right cycle to be utilized. So that's another way that we can create a very quick energy, well, it's a very slow energy exchange, but we can take actions quickly. Simple action of planting pawpaw trees amidst an oak forest might be someone's retirement plan, because the bark from that pawpaw tree might cure your cancer. So it's important. Also, pawpaws are diverse. They also can't be shipped very well, and they taste like all kinds of amazing things. And there's people, just like my friend that's obsessed with mangoes, there are people, whole clubs of people who trade stalks of pawpaws and their flavor and taste. And just people getting excited about something like that is so awesome. And so what things are we going to get excited about and be part of? Okay. Any other questions, Julie?
Well, my question was about stratifying. It didn't work.
Oh, stratifying?
These were supposed to be done. I found some pawpaws, the seeds. These are the seeds. I found some, didn't know what they were at Sahale. There's so much at Sahale, you just have to go and explore it to see everything. They can't tell you about everything. And I found some of these, I went, what is this? And then I saw it on a permaculture book cover. And I went, that was it. And it was a pawpaw. So anyway, I saved them, shared them around, and realized that they were going to die if I didn't put them in the fridge and stratify them. But I probably did it too late because these, I don't know if you can see it, I stratified them. They should have been done in May. And there's no shoots or cracks or anything. They're still, so, oh well, maybe I did it too late or not too long because I see rotten roots. They haven't cracked or stratified in the fridge.
You know what this is kind of on the same subject. One thing I really love doing is just asking, what would nature do by itself? Even if sometimes it's a longer time, you just go let it do that thing. I've done this so many times with people like, hey, why in the world are you putting your papaya seeds in little starts? Like just empty your pawpaw or your papaya seeds out and just spread them out on the ground and let them grow. The root from a papaya tree goes super deep quickly, you know? And so many people don't really realize all these little steps we have, maybe they're just more opportunities to make mistakes. And like, how would nature produce this pawpaw? And for me, I did this with, what is it? I just lost it. Persimmons. So persimmons are stratified, or if they go through the digestive system of a coyote, they are ready to go. So if you just find some coyote poop with some persimmon seeds in them, you can just throw those in your swale and you'll have some swale plants. So little things like that are kind of fun. Just like, what did nature already do? And let's just like do that thing. And before long, you're like, I'm not running around that field and trying to figure out how to make this kite fly. The kite's gonna fly by itself. The question is, are we going to enjoy the process of just holding the string? So, any other questions? Anyone want to
go from Russ out of that one?
Anyone want to make any comments publicly or questions?
We had some compliments. I liked what let's see, Kathy Ging said about enjoying your lifetime journey, how you came to permaculture. And I remember that caught my attention because when I first heard his story, I was like, wow. And yeah, then says, I think that part of my permaculture hasn't transformed the world is that there's so much fear which is being cultivated. People don't want to be coppiced because they've been taught to fear not having enough, quote unquote.
Oh yeah, well, because we're in a scarcity mindset as a culture. And the scarcity mindset makes us like rigid. And the reality is, and that's what the cool thing about getting exciting about what nature does is, it's just this like, it's okay, we can stop. We can realize and produce some food over time. Some of the perennial food systems are the most nutrient dense, healing foods you can eat. But a lot of us are just like, well, I need to eat today. Like, I need to make this food happen. And if we can move past that system or have some sort of transition from a perpetual labor system into more of a harvest and tending system, that's where that harmony lies. And you know, some people have joy in growing a nice big acre of row crops. Good for you.
There was one question that is synced with mine, I guess. Merla, did I say that right? Merla, do they have a short growing season? Let's see, growing season. I mean, mine, when I discovered the ones I found at Sahale last fall, they were green and they were dropping, and I kind of let them ripen inside, and some of them did, and they were yummy, and some rot. But yeah,
Pawpaws are so diverse in their, it's like each rootstock and each tree itself, because you can graft them, so you can get some that are nice grafted. They have a life of their own, and they have their own growing season of their own. So it'd be good for us to kind of like observe those and roll with the knowledge if you know if a true variety. Now I did buy some true varieties because I was excited about some of the people who are excited about their pawpaws and charged me $50 for this little twig that I laughed, and like, I paid $50 for that? And I just found its best space, which is basically just in a dense, like shaded, no sun area where you can coppice the tree later on and allow it to open up into a pawpaw patch eventually. So trying to mimic some of those things, but give it that space and then hand it a few years, you know, and then observe that pawpaw over time. So, okay, so that's like a grafted, like, you know, pawpaw, but like a seeded pawpaw is like a seeded apple. It's like it's so much more excited than the one that someone else was excited about. It's like, it's almost like this person like saw this amazing hike, and you just like sit there and like hear the story of the hike. At some point, go take the hike yourself. Mm-hmm. Take a seed of an apple and plant it. And there's a phrase that's, I think, is pretty toxic, and I've made it amazing. So I've harmonized this phrase. And so the phrase goes, that's been harmonized, is a people together grow great when people plant trees whose shade they'll never sit. The original phrase, and there's all these other phrases in our culture, is a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they'll never sit. You know, so that my David version, I think, is a little bit more fun, but just get this excitement of planting that seed, and you may never eat an apple or a pawpaw from that seed, and be okay with it, and share that joy with the next set of people, because someone's going to pick that pawpaw and taste it and be like, oh, wow, this is amazing. This tastes like nothing. I don't even know what it tastes like. It just, is it a pineapple? No. Is it an apple? Is it a banana? No. It's just this, it's this amazing pawpaw, and it tastes like, and they just make up a word, and then they share the joy with someone else, and they take a branch off of that, and then they might go ahead and take the arm off of that tree and go put it on the leg of another tree, and to hand that flavor to another person. But I don't know, for me, allowing a seed to go in the ground, the roots to go where it needs to be is so much, I find more joy in that. And yes, people are like, well, we're not going to get as much yield and all these other things. Okay, yeah. But you know what? There's so much land. There's so much space to grow pawpaw trees. Just get piles of pawpaw seeds and spread them around. And have the joy that someone's going to get joy. And that's that second part of the first ethic, is like honoring yourself. But then honoring the selves of the other people. And that includes the people of the future.
Can I ask a question about what you just said?
Yeah.
You said get piles of pawpaw seeds, and I think I saw in the chat that someone said you can't let the seeds dry out. How do you handle pawpaw seeds in order to get them planted? I'll just tell you, what I have is second growth fir forest for the most part. 2/3 of the land is second growth fir forest, and 1/3 is partially cleared, you know, with the house on it.
Shorter season than mine, than Holly.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm at 2,300 feet in the Oregon Cascade foothills.
Good question. There might be other people who can answer this in more depthly there. Specifically, you got an altitude difference, and you have an ecosystem a little bit different. I'm really specialized in deciduous forest, not coniferous forest, but this is what I would do based on what you said. I would try to mimic some of its environment quickly by planting something like a black locust or and just a whole plethora of trees, even blackberries in a nice little area, but make sure it's like a total shade. And so if you can find a space within your open area that's not open, that's kind of, and not only just sunlight, but also wind, the leaves. You seen the leaf of a pawpaw is nice and long. Just imagine a young pawpaw tree going, whoa, being blown around by the wind. Give it its own little space. There's people who laughed at me in Oklahoma a lot. Like, they're like, oh, David, they reenact me. Like, David, you talked about your goji berry plant. And I'm like, and you walk by this area and like, David, where's this goji berry plant you keep on talking about? And like I pulled back the bushes of all this other like symbiotic, someone called weeds or whatever. I pulled it back, and there was a little goji berry plant, little bit right there. And this guy said, how long is that goji berry plant? I said, that goji berry plant's like 2 years old. And I was like, he's like, 2 years old, it's only this big. I was like, yeah, they're rabbits and deer and everything. Just keep it. I was like, the environment's getting better. This guy came back year after year and always say, hey, can we go back and look at this goji berry plant? And believe it or not, it makes me cry because there's so much I put into that land and there's so much of my connection. But like that gentleman was able to see a pretty large goji berry plant, and it changed his life. For him to make a joke that I can laugh at, and he's able to see. And so possibly I'm going to actually do this as we take more. Did that answer your question? Maybe.
Oh, except for the seeds themselves.
The seeds themselves. I would follow what your people in your environment are succeeding at doing. For example, myself, I just mimicked what nature already did. So for example, I actually got a bunch of seedlings themselves, but when I was able to get seeds, I literally put them, and I put a flag. I put them in an oak forest, and I put like 2 or 3 seeds, pretty far apart. But then I put one of those little flags in, and I just leave it. Don't even walk in that area, whatever else like that. And when I walked through that forest, maybe 2 years later, and was able to see the pawpaws rising, that's when you start tearing up. You're like, you did it. Oh, I'm so proud of you. Like, this is exciting. So I'm going to very quickly, I've told you guys so many stories. I think we have enough time, hopefully we do. I'm going to just quickly go through a slideshow. And I'm going to start from, let me see here. I'm going to share my screen here. Share screen. And here. Okay, and it might come through a little bit blurry. Okay, so this is my farm 2 weeks ago. And I could talk for hours on this, but this is a large pond, 3 acres. So just so you give a general idea, this water area here is 3 acres. This right here is probably about 20 acres. And this whole area, big-wise, is about 40 acres. This area was cropped in the 1960s, and the sloped area right here and the sloped area up here was pure clay when I started. So you see all the greenery happening here. This is all growth, and this is in my research. This is research area number 1, and this is research area number 2. The big thing that makes me tear up here is you can see, well, you can't see very much if you don't know it's here, but there's a pond here and a pond here and a pond here. You notice this red here? That is topsoil washing into the ponds. The black ponds show minerals being brought up within the pond via spring, because we stacked water higher up on the altitude. The distance and altitude from one side of this picture to the other is 50 feet. So we have a really big altitude change. We stacked water on the hill, and we were able to see it. Within this little area right here, hold on a few seconds here. I'm gonna get a marker. This area right here has 6 ponds in it. So I could go on for hours, honestly. Let me see here. I could go on for hours, but let me just move on and just show you some random pictures. So that is the thing. Oh, really quickly, one thing I have to realize, I got to give you this is a warning for people. Permaculture sometimes has a worm stage, and sometimes has a cocoon stage, and sometimes has a butterfly stage. This is important to grasp, okay? You have to realize that some regeneration has to go through a metamorphosis in a cocoon. And so as I show you these pictures, I'm showing you the butterfly right now. This is a butterfly from a drone view just weeks ago. This system went through some major metamorphosis after a major destruction, but it survived and worked well. So keep in mind, some harmonious systems need a cocoon, and don't be afraid of the cocoon stage. And you can invite people out like me that can get you excited and tell you stories about the butterfly. and visit some of the butterfly locations all across the Pacific Northwest. There's piles of them. So I want to kind of give that as like a warning, you know, a warning. So I'm going to start it off. This is my first winter on the land. I'm going to get rid of my notations, clear, all drawings. Okay, I'm just going to go quickly here. This is some goats. I got my goats on the farm. This is the land without snow. That's the valley that have been cropped. That was my first, some row crops I was doing so I can help pay the mortgage. I joined the fire department. This is very important so you know, like I am well trained in wildland fire and I do designs, permaculture designs based on what I know of fire movement through land. So if you want in the Pacific Northwest for me to come and do permaculture design that comes with my credentials is fighting fires. So this is my fire suit. All right, so this is me building that 3-acre pond. I regret building that pond. That's for another argument or another discussion. Come take my full immersion earthworks courses that I offer at least once a year in the Pacific Northwest. And we'll talk about this 3-acre pond, 4-acre pond that I developed and why I would never build it again. But I love it, it's beautiful, but it was very much built out of pride, not out of harmony. There was much of, this is the pond at year 1. This is the valley that you just saw with the satellite imagery in the winter. This is me digging swales on contour up on top of a hill looking down into the valley. This is the valley. Spring has happened. You notice I'm allowing some of the systems to regenerate themselves. This is another pond that I was putting in place in year 2 or 3. This is that pond finished. This is the big pond. You're gonna notice the big pond's gonna go through some changes. I was involved in some neat natural building systems connected to my land as I help people get land connected, so building community. Tomatoes. This is, people asked about raised garden beds. This was my version 3 of my raised garden bed system, and you'll be able to see some pictures of that. This is my first water in my highest level pond, and I use this for training purposes to show you some things, but this was the first water overflowing out of the pond. This is one pond filled up after one rainstorm. Ponds, this is a soldier beetle protecting my Cherokee purple tomato, which is the best tomato in the world from my perspective. This is my neat cow. Her name is Crooked Horn, and she was pregnant at the time here. And that's a wild turkey that's showing up and hanging out in my food forest. There's some more food coming out. This is a view of raised garden beds. Oh, this is a video. Raised garden bed systems. This is year 5. I don't know, the video just kind of showed up in here. There's the pond with some water in it. So yeah, that's a view. Here's my cow. Oh, this is the baby cow. This is a baby cow born. Her name is Mary. There's another cow. That's Keith and some vegetables. That's that pond. You saw the pond dug. This is the pond full of water. This is 2 years after the pond was built. There is baby Mary and Crooked Horn. This is a swale on contour in its first winter. This is it full of water and water flowing everywhere. Heavy rains in the winter. This is the pond again. This is my version number 6, the raised garden bed system. This is some of the forms. This is a round version coming off. I'm going super quick here. We can discuss things later. This is more like a sneak preview. This is a cow's nose. My cow loves kisses. So this is what it looks like for a cow to come give you a kiss. And just like we did in the beginning, just imagine this cow coming up and just like kissing you. It's just, there's other kisses I prefer over the cow, but I really enjoy cow kisses, honestly. The garden beds, I made them so we can etch on the side of them and it's permanent. So we get patterns in the edges so we can make it. They're pieces of art that will last hundreds of years because of the way they're built. There's a fire coming headed towards the house, me fighting a fire. So it's very important. This is a system of, I helped pay my mortgage on my farm by spreading nematodes, utilizing natural nematodes, beneficials, and sprayed them for people. I made about $2,000 a day over a matter of a few days in Oklahoma spraying nematodes. I can go into that more another time, but I can kind of show you that. Here's some more concrete beds coming out the forms. Look at some of the art that's coming off of the garden beds. This is, speaking about permaculture of like aging, these beds are designed for people to sit on the edge and to be harmonious with what's inside. Also, the color on this bed is all natural color. So this is what the final beds look like before you put soil in them, 18 inches tall, 4 inches in width of the wall there. And this is designed, her great-great-grandchildren will probably utilize this garden bed. And just compare this to using wood, the yield from this is much better. All right, so this is just some food coming off. This is me learning how to rescue people from cutting out of cars. I use this as an example of utilizing some of the resources you have within your community and being part of community to rescue people. And so this is me learning how to cut people out of cars. I have the highest level of extraction training, and that comes into my life story later on. I might get to a picture of that. There's the cows, ponds not holding water. So we're gonna put the cows down there to eat, and they love the pond. And you'll see pictures of cows swimming. My cows love going for a swim in the summer. So in the winter, they hang out in there, and so we can pack down the pond. There's a set of garden beds there's with color on them. This is just a picture of the untouched forest. So beautiful. This is me. I was on my way to Oregon and Washington, and I came across a wreck that had just happened, and I was able to extract 2 young children out of a car and call in a helicopter that the highway patrol couldn't call in. And we medevaced, they brought in the jaws of life that the fire department didn't know how to use. And I said, I'm authorized, and we cut them out of the car based on the training I was had, and flew them to Salt Lake City on my way to visit Shaylee. I think this was like 2 days before visiting Shaylee for the 2nd time, I think. So that was that funny. This is that garden bed that the elderly lady was utilizing. And so that's her in her garden bed. This is late fall in the garden bed. This is the cows coming down the hill. Some grapes, passion flower vine. This is Jade, one of the children I tend to, playing in the water. And flowers, we're growing flowers. Marley will be happy that this is some of my flowers, Marley. And grapes, solar and flowers. Solar and flowers go, and there's a butterfly there. Go together. These garden beds are amazing. This is another, because a client, so I'm starting to sell garden beds. I'll pay, there's a cow swimming. They love swimming. They pee too. See, there's a cow peeing. We had that question about cows peeing. Just have the cows swim in your pond. Now you have some nutrient-rich water to go swim in with the cows. So the cows love, and they pack that. And more flowers for Marley. There we go. And cows swimming. Nice. This is the view from my porch, just letting some of nature take its course in its metamorphosis. There's the pond, not much water in it, many years in. Oh, this is me finished the pond. I guess it's going back in time for a second. That's me on a bulldozer on the top of the dam. There's the cows. And this is a year ago. So this is the pond full of water. That's the rowboat right there. You get perspective. Those are the raised garden beds right there. You see the blackness of these ponds. These are now spring fed. If you all also notice, you'll see this dark color going through the valley right here. That is a spring fed stream now. There's a constant flow of water for the past 2 years going through the bottom of my valley. The city or the county basically said that there was they'd wash out the major road year after year after year for the past, like, as long as that county commissioner, which was super old, had been there. He said that my water systems allowed for not a drip of water to pass under or over that road. You also notice there's more red ponds up here. Those are higher level ponds. There's a red pond here. You saw those in pictures. And this was a funny thing. So Oklahoma, keep in mind, Oklahoma is like, don't even talk about smoking anything in Oklahoma. So I have a pretty conservative farm. And I sold it to someone who I wanted to sell it. I basically kind of sold it. It's on, owner finance deal, but it's someone who'd tend to the land. I transferred tending of the land, and they're doing an energy exchange with me at this point, and I'm still involved in the research and development of the farm. But the other day, the person who's tending the land, I was talking to him on the phone. We have constant conversations, and he made some comment about one of the neighbors being like not talking to him anymore. And I was like, oh, why is that? He's like, well, he started like backtracking, and I was like, what is the problem? He's like, well, I did get a license to grow weed. And I was like, really? Well, I was like, wow, like I know Elaine Ingham's research and everything. I was like, you're growing marijuana on my research farm. He's like, yeah. He's like, it's growing like crazy. Like we even got he got an analysis of it and all this stuff. And he's like getting excited. He's like, you're not upset? I was like, No, no, not at all. Actually, I'd like to get that data. Like it's scientific data. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. This was just an average day picking mushrooms, which are exciting. I talked to you about persimmons. That's a fun persimmon picture. Amphibians coming out. It's a sign. Anytime new permaculture person, you see, if you're looking at a piece of land, and you see a lot of frogs and you see a lot of lizards and things like that. It's one picture that there's likely not as much toxins within the water systems that they are living in, because they're some of the first things that die, and they're an important part of the food chain. And when you're repairing, when you see the numbers rise, and when you go out into a food forest and you hear croaking of all kinds of frogs and toads, it's a good sign. So this is the untouched forest after a fungal flush from cattle and goats, and this is a part of the system of tending to the untouched oak canopy. More weed pictures here. There's some nitrogen fixator, and we're back to that original picture. So any questions?
I just want to do a time thing with you. It's 11:10, so we probably want to play the video soon, so we have time for a little bit of questions after that too.
Awesome.
That might pop up.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much, and I'm gonna go ahead and queue up that video. And I wanted to just quick note as I'm pulling this up. I do have a Venmo that's listed. It's I think, is it Plant a Tree? Yeah, at Plant a Tree Venmo. And I want you to know that that money, if you decide you want to, first off, I don't need any money. But second off, that money that I get from my Venmo goes towards me helping people who can't pay for a plane ticket or gas money for me to come out. So sometimes I'll like go out to certain places and people can't afford to have me come and do certain work. And so people who need my help, it helps me to support those people. So it'll either be spent on that or trees for people who need trees is another thing. Is I believe that we should all have seeds and we should all have trees to plant. And if people need a tree or need some seeds, contact me and we can help you out. Let's see here.
There were a few questions if you want to do quick answers.
Yeah, I'll do that while I'm doing this.
Julie mentioned or asked that you mentioned spraying beneficial nematodes as pest management, and she's curious about slug-eating nematodes. She's trying to make Alex Fethier's slug goo out of slugs.
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't have an answer to that, but I'll see what I can find. I do know that it brings down the tick population by 80% if it's sprayed at just the right time. And in Oklahoma, in a specific part of Oklahoma, you do it the day after the red buds turn red, or turn purple, really. So red buds in Oklahoma just blossom out at a beautiful time, and you say, what? This is, and I have to have my nematodes already ordered and ready and in my refrigerator ready for that time. And that's an observation of the patterns of nature. So we can't just say, oh, on April 15th, this is when we spray nematodes. No, we have changes, we have global warming, we have so many things happening. And so I just use that pattern of nature. I would try that there as a starting point, is if you have red buds, when do they turn?
Okay. There's another question here too about the cow poop in the water, asking if you're not concerned about that.
Okay, so the cow poop in the water, I'm not drinking out of that water. And I actually keep that in mind, that there's cow poop in the water. I made a joke about swimming in it. That the cows are no longer in the water. I think cows on the edges of the right ponds at the right time is a good thing. Cows in the ponds at the right time is good, but it's something to be very cautious about. It's definitely one of those red flag dangers to keep in mind. But that itself is part of, you can look up glee. Glean is a way of sealing ponds. It's actually, sometimes they use cow poop or pig poop, or just layering different types of organic matter into the pond, and then getting the hooves to push it down. And also cow urine is also helpful in that process. So it was basically, we are reenacting the process that had been done for hundreds of years called gleaning a pond.
Sounds good. Sylvan asked a question about pawpaws, and I might have the answer to it, but she asked 2 years ago, we walked the company landscaping the planting strip along the adjacent developing into planting a food forest. They planted a bunch of pawpaws. The landscaper got really excited about them. He gave us a bunch of different varieties. So far, we've seen no fruit, though. How long do they take to fruit? And that might also be you don't have the right pollinators. To get the pollinators that you need there, I know at Burnt Ridge, when I worked there, we often recommended people put out meat and let it rot, because your pollinators are flies and things that like that rotting meat, and put it in between your trees and they will pollinate those plants.
That's a little gross, but okay, cool.
It is a little gross. It's a little weird, but they have a different set of pollinators than like what we're used to. You know, we're used to attracting butterflies and bees and all those other things, but this is, yeah, pawpaws have different set.
Joshua has an interesting question. I'm sorry to delay the slideshow, but
I'm
he
trying to
wants
get it sound going anyway, so.
Okay, what are your thoughts on how to contain invasives that are also nitrogen fixers so that they don't escape into the neighborhood to become someone else's problem?
Some of the ones that, yeah, he says the fast-growing ones like black locust, acacia, Scotch broom, that are considered invasive. What are your thoughts on that?
Definitely being conscious of that, but especially when we're developing a space like that should be forest, nature wants to go back to forest. The canopy, if nature's wanting to go back into forest, and that's a natural environment for the space, the canopy, after really the first coppicing of the trees, that'll stop. But if you're concerned about it, only use it in the center of your food forest and kind of grow out, and then just coppice heavy. That's not complicated. And I would also, most of the time, in general, I respect the laws of the land. That's important. And the science is pretty clear on certain things in certain places that are invasives. But I would say, in general, I'm not one that demonizes invasives. I'm just cautious. It's just one of those knowledges. They're just an element within nature we need to respect. And what they're most of the time doing and spreading is they're like taking a niche that doesn't want to be a prairie and trying to make it a forest. And so a lot of times we find invasives in areas that are outside of a balance. So once in a balance, once in a canopy, we really have no problem with invasives.
There's a book, I can't, it's a two series book, but it's a big one. And they don't say invasives. He specifically says that those plants are opportunistic. They're taking advantage of the situation there. I know on my farm, we have lots of Scots broom, and we want to eventually not have it, but we're leaving it there because it is nitrogen fixing. It's doing things, it's providing stuff right now, and we're slowly clearing bits out, allowing the forest to grow, allowing other plants to take over. So like in the places where we do have growth of alders and other things, you see the blackberries are less, you see the Scots broom is less, like some of that stuff naturally becomes less, and we clear out some of that in the forest area to kind of help the other plants grow up into it.
Yeah, and if someone's referring to blackberries and as invasive, I would just say, yeah, you don't get me too excited about that one. Just use that. Yeah. It's just saying, anytime you see blackberries, you're like, hey, I want to be a forest. Go ahead and push the blackberries aside and plant yourself the best food forest in the world right there. And start off by picking blackberries while you're planting. You got food and a place to plant them.